Hello, and welcome to your PowerPoint module for this week. We're going to discuss quantitative data analysis. And for this week, it's just going to be an introduction. So what do we mean by quantitative data analysis? How do we prepare data, get it ready to be analyzed? What types of variables are you going to encounter in quantitative data analysis? That's what we're going to talk about this week. And then for the remainder of the semester, we're going to be going over various types of quantitative data analysis. And you are actually going to use SPSS, which is a statistical software program, to do these types of analyses. Okay, so it is going to be a more hands-on second half of the semester, working with real data, working with examples. But this is just a preview of what to look forward to for the coming weeks. Our objectives for this week are to introduce quantitative data analysis, and this includes preparing the data for analysis. We're going to go over different types of variables you might encounter, and then some just basic types of data analysis that you might see, and we'll go into these in more detail in future weeks. So basically, at this point in the semester, we're saying you've gathered your data. Maybe you have gathered your data through questionnaires or interviews or through coding content. What do you do next? And that's where analysis comes in. I expect that this module will take you about an hour to complete, maybe a little bit less. Your deliverables for this week include an opening question, a couple of content questions, and a video question. Okay, so the usual for your PowerPoint module. You don't have an assignment due this Friday because I pushed our exam 2 to next week. Okay, so you have exam 2 next week, but not this Friday. Here's your opening question, and it's not really an opening question, okay? But I do want you to do this, and I want to build this into your module, so we'll get it done. We're just past the halfway point in the semester, so this is the time when I like to get some feedback from you on how things are going in this course. So instead of doing an opening question, I want you to pause the PowerPoint module and complete the mid-semester check-in on Inquire. Okay, and this is actually under our section for this week. So if you scroll to our section for this week, you'll find that mid-semester check-in. Your responses for the mid-semester check-in are anonymous. Okay, so I'm not going to know who submitted what unless you explicitly tell me or give me some kind of detail that would make me know who you are in your responses. Okay, but again, the point of the mid-semester check-in is just so that I get a sense of where you are and how you're feeling about how this course is going. And I also want to know if there's anything that I can do or that we can do as a class to make the content either more accessible or engaging, or to change the format of the course to make your semester a little bit easier in some way. Of course, we can't completely change the way the course is being run, but if there are any suggestions, any thoughts that you have about what we could do differently, or perhaps what we could do more of, because there's some part of the course that you like, I would really love to have that kind of feedback. All right, so you can pause now, go to that mid-semester check-in, and then come back for the rest. Because we're starting a new section of this course, I want to reflect on where we've been in terms of the course content and also introduce where we are going. This image might look familiar to you, this kind of flow chart. I had put this up in a PowerPoint module early on in the semester. I think the first module we had about the research process. So this is a flow chart that depicts the typical research process, obviously in a much more organized way than it actually happens most of the time. But if you take a look at this chart and this process, you may notice that throughout the semester, we have been following this linear research process, right? So toward the beginning of the semester, you developed your research question or questions. Just recently, you completed your literature review, and in that, you've probably started to formulate some hypotheses about what you might see if you were to conduct the analysis or the research you're proposing. We also, in the past couple of weeks, discussed gathering data, different methods of gathering data, whether that's using questionnaires or interviews, content analysis, structured observation, existing data analysis. These are various ways of gathering our data. Now, In the coming weeks, we're going to be focusing on the next stage, and that is analyzing the data. So what do you do once you've formulated your research question, reviewed the literature, you have some hypotheses, you've gathered your data using whatever method you chose? Now we're going to take all that data and we have to analyze it. We want to identify patterns. We want to test our hypotheses. So that's where we are now, okay? It is important to think about the connections between these different stages of the research process, because ultimately, when you finish writing your proposal, you should have a proposal that draws these connections. Your research question should be related to the literature you reviewed, should be related to the data that you have proposed to gather, and should also be connected with the analysis that you would do or that you would plan to do for your proposal, okay? So this is just a depiction of where we've been in this course and also describes where we are going in the coming weeks. So as I said, we're now in the data analysis phase. That's what we're going to be covering now. What is the purpose of data analysis? What do we hope to gain from it? Here are a few key questions that you might consider as you think about data analysis, what it is, what it does, why we do it. First, how would you describe the variables that you are using in your research? For example, if one of your variables is income, so you're interested in income, that's one of the key factors in your research. How will you describe the overall level of income in your sample, right? We need to describe it. We need to get a sense of who's in our sample and the average income in our sample. That's one part of data analysis. In addition, in order to answer your research questions, we probably are going to look at some relationships between variables. So that's our second question here. How are variables in your research related to one another? You'll see a lot of varying terms used that generally mean the same thing or something very similar. Relationship, so the relationship between two variables. Association is another way of saying that. Correlation is another way of saying that. It does have some more specific definitions within data analysis, but all of these generally mean the same thing. Now, let's say, for example, I want to know if there is an association between income, one of my variables, and job satisfaction, another variable. I need to determine how I'm going to test for this relationship. And this is where quantitative data analysis really becomes important because it enables us to identify relationships between our variables. Okay? So that's what data analysis is about in a nutshell. And there are multiple ways that we could analyze data. So that's what we're going to be covering in the coming weeks. Now, before we get to describing our variables and identifying relationships between them, we need to prepare our data for analysis. And this is where coding comes in. And I've used this word a number of times in class. Let me give you a solid definition of what we mean by coding. So coding is the process of turning qualitative information into quantitative data. Another term that I've used is operationalizing, right? We're taking something, some information that we have, and we need to quantify it. This is what happens. So again, we're not quite at the analysis stage, but at this point in our research process, let's say we've gotten all of our questionnaire responses or interview responses, or if you're doing content analysis, we've coded our content in preparation for that analysis. Now what do? We need to organize our data in a way that enables us to analyze it. And this is why coding is important. So for example, let's say I did a questionnaire, and this was actually an example in the book. I had a questionnaire, distributed it, got my responses, and one of the questions on my questionnaire was, which of the following best describes your main reason for going to the gym? Okay, so let's say that's my question. And I gave a number of options for respondents to respond to this question. They could say for relaxation, maintain or improve fitness, and so on. So these were the fixed response options that they were given. Now, coding means that I'm taking these qualitative categories here and I'm assigning a number to them. So in our data, or my data, what I would do is I would take, say, relaxation. That's my first category. That equals 1. Maintain or improve fitness. That equals 2. Lose weight is 3, and so on. And in doing this, I am making the data analyzable. I don't think that's a word, but I'm making it analyzable in that now I have numbers that I can use to do some statistical tests. Okay, so this is what coding is. And this is just one example. Now, once I have coded all of perhaps the questionnaire items, every question that I asked in a questionnaire, and it doesn't have to be a questionnaire, it could be other means of data collection, but let's say I'm talking about a questionnaire here. The next stage is to actually build my data set. I've coded everything, now I need to put it onto a spreadsheet in a way that we can put it into statistical software to be analyzed. So what does this look like? A data set is, let me give you some definitions. A data set is a spreadsheet of all of your data, including cases and variables, that is prepared for analysis. Okay, and I'll show you an example of what this would look like on the next slide. Within that definition, we've got two other terms. We have a case and a variable. Now a case, this might seem pretty straightforward, a case is going to be a person or perhaps a particular type of content. So maybe if we're doing content analysis, each newspaper article is another case. If we're doing analysis at the ecological level, right, we're not looking at individuals, maybe we're looking at schools. So each school is a case, or each county is a case. I know that I'm just giving you examples to define what a case is, but to me this seemed to be the most direct way to understand it. It's either a person, some unit of content, or some institution that's in your sample, depending on your unit of analysis, okay? And if this isn't clear now, I'm hoping it'll be clear in a moment. Now, variables, I've used this term quite a bit already without really defining it, but a variable is an attribute that varies, hence the name variable, from case to case, all right? And when we do quantitative data analysis, we are working with variables. We are identifying relationships between variables. Let's return to that example from the previous slide. I had coded that item about reasons for going to the gym. Now, if I were to prepare my data set and put this all into a spreadsheet, maybe it would look something like this. So on the right side of the slide here, you see one column for respondent and one column for what I call gym reason. And that would be my variable based on that item in the questionnaire. So here I have each respondent, so that's each participant in the study, they are numbered. And then beside their number is the corresponding response that that respondent gave for the variable gym reason. Okay? So what you see here is a data set that has variables in each column. There's only one variable here, that's gym reason, and cases in each row. So for respondent 1, the value for gym reason was 4. For respondent 2, it was 2. For respondent 3, it was 5, and so on. So this is a pretty simple example, right? This is not a data set that we could really analyze. We've got nine respondents, 9 cases, and only one variable for them. So this isn't something that we could really do much with. Let's look at a bigger example. So if I were to start with this example, but now I'm adding more variables and more cases, what might my data set look like? So here's what a larger data set might look like. And I know this might be small and blurry for you, but bear with me. So what I did is I opened Excel and I just started filling in some random numbers. So this is fake data, but we might imagine that we get something like this. And all I did was expand on the example from the previous slide. So you see respondent number there, And gym reason is in there. It's a few columns in. That's our variable that we started with. And then I added some additional variables that we might have in our data set as well, right? These are other items that might be on our questionnaire. So maybe I want a variable for gender. I want to be able to identify the gender of my participants. Age. The other variables here, this is, again, based on an example in the book. Equipment, so this variable was, or the question in the questionnaire was, what types of equipment do you typically use at the gym? And then it had, I think, different types of equipment. Weights could be another variable, so how frequently do you use weights, or I can't remember exactly what it was. And then how frequently do you go to the gym? That would be gym freak. Okay, so I've named my variables. Notice that they're all one word, no spaces. That keeps SPSS happy. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But this is what a data set might look like that has more variables and has more participants. We have 32 participants here. Not bad, not bad. We might want to get a few more. And then we have 6 different variables here. Okay? And this is organized in a way that makes it possible for us to analyze the data in SPSS. You're going to see examples of that in a moment. And recall again that variables are in each column, and then our cases are in each row. So for respondent number 1, for example, we have 6 corresponding variables or observations for that respondent. So gender is 1, which perhaps that's male, depending on how we decided to code things. Age is 22. Their response for gym reason was a 1, and so on. Okay? This is what our data might look like. Often it's much bigger than this. Okay, so this again is a simplified, smaller example. This is what you would see. Here's your first content question, and you have 2 of them, so I labeled this one content question number 1. Thinking about your proposed research, list at least 3 variables that you would have in your data set. So imagining, let's say imagine you've done your data collection. What variables are you going to get from that? Why are these variables important to include in order to answer your research questions? Okay, so you are thinking ahead here of what kinds of variables you're going to end up with, but I think it's a good time to be thinking about this, right? What specific variables would you end up with if you did this research? Okay, so you can pause, answer this on Inquire, and then return for the rest. Now let's spend some time on different types of variables. Now, in your first content question that you just did, you were coming up with the specific variables that might be in your data if you were to do your proposed project. Now, these variables that you chose, they may come in different forms, okay? And there are 4 types of variables that we typically see in quantitative social science research. Okay? It's important to identify what type of variable or variables you have, because this is going to determine the type of quantitative analysis that you do, as we're going to see in the next few weeks. So we're not going to talk about that in this module, but we'll talk about those types of analysis next week, the week after, and after that. Okay? So what are these 4 types of variables? Let's go through each one, and I have examples underneath to help clarify what these all mean. The first is interval ratio. And interval and ratio, these terms mean slightly different things, but we're lumping them together. For our purposes, they are the same, doesn't matter. So interval/ratio is the first one. Interval ratio variables are continuous variables, meaning there are many values, many possible values that each participant can have for these variables. And they also have, this is an important characteristic, they have regular distances between all categories in the range. What does this mean? I think it actually helps to use an example to clarify what we mean by that. Let's take height. Maybe we're using height in our analysis because we're interested in health outcomes, and height is one component that we're going to incorporate in our analysis. Height is an example of an interval ratio variable, right? It's a continuous measure. There are many possible values for height. It's not just a few categories. There are lots of values. In addition, for height, the regular distances thing, let's get into that. An inch is an inch is an inch if we're measuring height in inches, right? The difference between 50 and 51 inches, is 1 inch, is the same as the distance or difference between 62 and 63 inches. An inch is an inch is an inch. So there are regular intervals, regular distances between all of the possible values in our variable. Okay, so that's what it means to have an interval ratio variable. We can think of a lot of other examples of this. Weight, if we're just doing continuous weight in pounds, that would be an interval ratio variable. Age, if we have age in years or age in months, that would be interval ratio. Income, if we're just looking at absolute dollars, how much our participants make in a given year, that would be interval ratio. It's a continuous measure. Now, let's go on to the next one, and that is an ordinal variable. Ordinal variables are different from interval ratio because ordinal variables are ranked categories. And the defining characteristic of an ordinal variable is we have unequal distances between our categories. For example, we talked about age as an interval ratio variable. Well, what if I collapsed it into various age groups instead? And my age groups had different numbers of years in them. So we see this more typically if we're looking at children and child development, right? The first year is very important, or even the first month. So maybe we have our first category is infants less than 1 month of age. And then we have 1 to 6 months of age. Okay, well now we're sticking 5 months into one category, right? And then we have another one that's 6 months to a year. So now we have 6 months in a category. Maybe we have 1 to 3 years as the next category. So these are different intervals, right? We have our first category was just 1 month, and then it was 5, and then it was 6, and then our next category was 2 years. So this would be an ordinal variable. We're collapsing age into these different categories. And the distance between these different categories and how many years are represented in each category is not the same. We also might think of things like educational degree. So what's the highest degree that you have attained or your participants in your research have attained? We might have categories like less than high school graduates, some college, got a college degree, and then more than college. Maybe those are our categories. Well, there's some order to these, right? Because there is a hierarchy here where the higher degrees, that's more education, okay? But at the same time, these are still categories. It's not a continuous variable. And the difference between, say, not having a high school degree and having a high school degree is not the same as the difference between having a high school degree and having some college, okay? We'll talk about more examples of this in class, but you commonly do see ordinal variables. Here's a flow chart that I got from the book that you can use in order to identify what kind of variable you have. I'm not going to go into great detail about this. I think this is self-explanatory and you can review it on your own, but you can ask these questions as you look at a variable and make a determination of what kind of variable you have. So for example, the first item here is, are there more than 2 categories? Yes or no? If there are more than 2 categories, then we need to go to the next question, right? Are they rank ordered? If there are only 2 categories, then we have a dichotomous variable. Okay, so you can review this and use this as a guide as you try to determine what types of variables you have. Here's your second content question, and you're actually going to draw on your first content question to answer this. So, return to the variables you listed for content question number 1. For each, name the type of variable that you would have. So would it be integral ratio, ordinal, nominal, or dichotomous? Explain how you identified which type of variable each would be. Okay? And I know you don't have, the questionnaire responses in front of you to do this. Perhaps you're still thinking about how you would ask a question on a questionnaire, how you would code it. But based on where you are right now in thinking about your proposed research, what types of variables do you think you're going to have for each of the variables you listed in content question number 1? All right, so you can pause here, answer this question, and then come back for the last couple of slides. Let's say we've got our data all prepared, we've maybe put it all into an Excel file, we know what kinds of variables we have. What do we do now? So as I said early on in the module, we are going to be using a package called SPSS to analyze data. And this stands for Statistical Package for the Social Sciences. So our next step is going to be putting our data into SPSS. And then once we have our data in SPSS, perhaps we can start our analysis. Okay? SPSS is a commonly used statistical software program in the social sciences. Okay, so it's something you see quite a bit in social science research. Unfortunately, it's quite expensive to have an SPSS license. Okay, so to download the program on your computer, it costs a lot of money. Now, fortunately for us, SPSS is available through the college, and it's available in a couple of ways. If you are on campus, all of the computers in Trout Hall and West Hall have SPSS. So you can go to a computer lab and just log in, and SPSS should be one of the programs that's downloaded onto those computers. Okay, so that's one way. I would say this is the least clunky way, because the other option, and I've used this plenty and it works just fine, the other option, if you are off campus or if you're using your own computer, you can access SPSS remotely by logging into the RCRC server. Okay, so this is the terminal server that the college has, and it allows you to access a server remotely. And you can open SPSS within the server. This is the URL to get to RCRC. I'll also put it on Inquire. And then once you get in, you have a few options. You can select various buildings. We would select West Hall because those are the computers that have SPSS. Okay, so we will do this in class. I'll make sure all of you are able to get to SPSS somehow. This is just for your knowledge now. I'm not going to ask you to get onto SPSS for this module. Okay, but we will do it in class. Rather than try to talk through introducing SPSS on the module, I'm going to direct you right to a video. And this is a video that is meant to introduce its viewers to SPSS and what SPSS looks like, what it can do. I ask that you do be patient with the beginning of this video. I know that you all know how to use a computer. The guy, talks quite a bit about what the purpose of the video is in the video series. This is a video series, so we're actually going to watch multiple videos of this guy explaining SPSS. I find that it is a useful tutorial, and it does show you what exactly you're going to see in SPSS when we get there. Okay? So here's your question. Distinguish between data view and variable view in SPSS, and this will make sense after you watch the video. How are variables organized in each view? What about cases? Okay, so remember those terms, variables and cases from before. So you can watch a video now. I will warn you, ads might pop up. Apologies, I can't control the ads that pop up. It happened to me as I was watching. But I do hope that this is a useful starting point for understanding what SPSS is, and we will work with it in class. Okay? So you can pause here, watch a video, answer this question. All right, that concludes our PowerPoint module for this week. Here's a note on what's coming up soon. We don't have any assignments due this Friday. Next week, you have a few readings. You're going to review or revisit Bryman chapters 15 and 16. I know you already looked at these for last week, or this week, I should say, but there's a lot in there, and we are going to gradually get through the content in these chapters. Okay, so review that. In particular, you might want to focus on sections on univariate analysis, because that's going to be our topic for next week. You also have a couple of websites to check out. These expand a bit upon what's in the book, give you a different perspective or different way of learning and understanding some of these terms in data analysis. Okay. Next Friday, you have your exam 2, okay? And I'll do it the same way as we did exam 1. I'm going to post it on Inquire. Then you'll have several days to complete it and submit it as a Word document, just like we did last time, okay? That's all I have for you. I will see you in class this week.